In the small town of Havenwood, the setting sun cast long shadows across the aging graveyard. The old headstones stood as silent sentinels, watching over the souls that lay beneath their cold, earthy beds. The air was thick with the mingled scent of decay and moss, and the eerie quiet of the place was only interrupted by the occasional distant hoot of a nocturnal creature. It was here, in this desolate place, that an old man named Ezekiel roamed among the graves. He was a man of mystery, a recluse who was rumored to dabble in the ancient arcane arts. He had long been fascinated by the idea of reanimation, the notion of bringing the dead back to life. And now, as he stood in the pale moonlight, a strange glint of determination shone in his eyes as he prepared to embark upon a dark and forbidden experiment. He had spent years studying the intricacies of the art, poring over ancient tomes and forbidden knowledge in his quest to unlock the secrets of life and death. And now, as he stood before a weathered headstone, he knew that he was on the brink of a momentous breakthrough. The ground lay freshly turned before him, and as he gazed down into the open grave, a sinister smile tugged at the corners of his lips. With a heavy heart and trembling hands, Ezekiel began the dark ritual. He chanted an ancient incantation, the syllables carrying ancient, eldritch power. The air crackled with otherworldly energy as he sprinkled a mixture of rare herbs and powders over the desecrated earth. The faint scent of incense hung in the air, adding to the surreal, otherworldly atmosphere. As he spoke the final words of the invocation, he felt a palpable shift in the air. A sense of creeping unease that made the fine hairs on the nape of his neck stand on end. The moment hung heavily in the cool night air, and then, without warning, a low, guttural moan filled the darkness, seemingly emanating from the very earth itself. Ezekiel's heart pounded with exhilaration and apprehension in equal measure. The moaning grew louder, more insistent, and then, with heart-stopping dread, the ground itself began to tremble. The grave seemed to convulse and shift, and then, as if propelled by some unnatural force, a hand broke through the cold, loamy soil. Ezekiel's eyes widened in a mixture of awe and terror as the figure of a man emerged from the grave. The dirt-clad figure stood before him, its eyes filled with a vacant, hollow gaze. There was an otherworldly air to its movements, as if it was not truly alive, but rather a haunting echo of the life it had once known. The figure lurched forward with jerky, uncoordinated movements, its unblinking gaze fixed upon Ezekiel. Its very presence seemed to radiate an unsettling aura, a sense of unending hunger and desperation that made Ezekiel's heart race with fear. But the old man's fascination and curiosity outweighed his terror, and he pressed on with the experiment, determined to control the force he had brought into being. Days turned into long, haunted nights as Ezekiel worked tirelessly to control his reanimated creation. The figure, the once dead man he had brought back to life, proved to be a twisted echo of its former self. Its movements were a grotesque, unnatural parody of life, and its gaze seemed to flicker with an eerily unsettling light. Ezekiel tried to subdue and contain the force he had unleashed, but the figure's presence seemed to seep into every corner of his life. Its malevolent, haunting energy consumed the old man with an inescapable grip, and a palpable sense of unease settled over him like a shroud. It was as if the creature had become something beyond his control, a force that defied the very fabric of reality. One night, as Ezekiel sat in his study, the air seemed to hum with an unnatural energy. The oppressive silence of the night was only broken by the occasional distant crack of thunder. An unyielding sense of dread settled over him, and his heart raced with a raw, unadulterated fear as he felt the presence of the reanimated figure looming over him. He hesitated for a moment, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end, before he reached for an old, weathered book that lay on his desk. It was filled with ancient knowledge, arcane secrets, and forbidden incantations that had festered within its pages for centuries. With a sense of trepidation, he began to pore over the text, seeking a way to control the creature that had become an inescapable force within his life. As he delved deeper into the dark, forbidden knowledge, a haunting, otherworldly cry echoed through the emptiness of the house. Ezekiel's heart thudded with unyielding fear as the figure materialized before him, its movements a grotesque, otherworldly blur. Its hollow, vacant gaze seemed to sear his very soul, and a palpable sense of terror gripped him with an unyielding force. The creature lunged forward with an insatiable hunger, its movements a horrific parody of life. Ezekiel stumbled back, his mind reeling with unbridled terror as he realized the depth of the forces he had unleashed. The figure seemed to loom closer, its presence an otherworldly reminder of the darkness that had seeped into his very being. He fled deeper into the shadows, the walls seeming to close in around him as if propelled by some unseen force. His heart raced with unyielding dread, the realization dawning on him that this was no longer his creation. It was a monstrous abomination, a vessel for dark forces that defied understanding. As he raced through the empty corridors, the air seemed to warp and twist around him, and the haunting, otherworldly cry of the creature echoed through the darkness. Its malevolent, haunting energy curtained around him with an unyielding grip, and Ezekiel knew that he was trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape. Finally, he reached the heart of the house, his eyes widening with horror as he saw the figure of the reanimated man standing before him. Its eyes gleamed with an otherworldly light, and its movements were filled with an unnatural, grotesque grace. The figure lunged forward with unbridled fury, its movements a grotesque, otherworldly dance. Ezekiel stumbled back, his heart pounding in his chest as he realized that there was no escape from the horror that awaited him. He turned and raced down the dimly lit hallway, the air thick with an unshakable sense of foreboding. The oppressive darkness seemed to pulse with an insidious, malevolent energy, and the unyielding grip of terror seemed to grow with every passing heartbeat. Finally, he reached the main door of the house, and with a surge of fear, he reached for the latch. But as he pushed against the heavy wood, the door refused to budge, as if some unseen force was holding it closed. Panic surged through Ezekiel as he struggled in vain to escape the claustrophobic grip of the house. And then, with a bone-chilling creak, the door swung open, revealing the figure of the reanimated man standing before him. Its eyes gleamed with an otherworldly light, and its movements were filled with an unnatural, grotesque grace. The creature let out a low, haunting moan, the sound filling the house with a sense of chilling despair. Ezekiel's mind reeled with terror as he realized that the creature had broken free of his control, driven by a force that he could neither comprehend nor contain. In a surge of desperation, he fled through the shadows, the air thick with the malevolent, haunting presence of the creature. His heart pounded in his chest as he raced through the empty, silent halls, and he knew that there was no escape from the horror that had been unleashed. In the end, Ezekiel's story became a cautionary tale, a grim fable of the dangers of meddling with forces beyond one's understanding. The old graveyard continued to cast long, brooding shadows over the town as the years passed, a silent testament to the darkness that had been unleashed within its borders. As the sun set over the silent headstones, an eerie hush seemed to settle over the desolate place, and the memory of Ezekiel and his ill-fated experiment became nothing more than a chilling ghost story whispered by the townspeople on dark, moonless nights. The legend of the reanimation and its tragic consequences served as a grim reminder of the darkness that lay in wait for those who dared to seek the secrets of life and death.